Okay, so kicking off. So hi everyone, my name is Christian. Welcome to the first session of the AI Week. Very excited to kick off with what is essentially a week-long series. There'll be more sessions just like this one running every single day of the week. There's one even after this talk, so do stick around. Everyone should have links for that. For the purpose of this session, please feel free to ask questions using either the chat function or the Q&A function. We'll try to incorporate this within the talk as and when we go. Now for today, I'm joined by two amazing speakers, Conrad from Novartis and Sam from Newman, who'll be giving us a glimpse on the technological change in healthcare and pharmaceuticals. And in no particular order, would you like to introduce yourselves?
Right, come on, Sam, you go first.
I'll take up half of the session introducing myself. Okay, I'll do that then. So hello everyone, great to join you for this session where I think we're going to be speaking about AI in healthcare and in the pharma sector. So I'm Sam Shah. I'm the Chief Medical Strategy Officer for a men's health company called Newman. And prior to that, I used to work in the NHS as the National Director for Digital Development, which is how I know Conrad, because we've worked together on many a project over the years. And, really, hopefully what we'll get out of today's session is a bit about the policy in the NHS. We can discuss how healthcare technology is changing, some of the challenges of trying to introduce, whether it's AI or any other technology in an environment like healthcare, and what it's like working with industry. And certainly from my point of view, I've been lucky enough to work in the NHS, but now I work in industry in a company that works very closely with pharma, given the type of medication that we're involved in.
Nice one. Thank you, Sam. So as you all know, heard, Sam and I, we know each other from a few previous engagements. So my name is Conrad Dobschütz. I work for Novartis in the UK, and I'm the head of customer solutions, digital innovation, and also I lead the biome in the UK. And the biome is really our innovation hub, which we have a network of in globally. We're launching a new health hub tomorrow, FYI, just a little plug right there. And Sam is going to be with us. So that's going to happen tomorrow. Really what I'm looking after in Novartis is the connection to the NHS. So how are we working with the NHS? How are we helping patients with either patient support programs that go alongside our products, our medicine. That can be an app, right? Something funky. That can be also a nurse service where a nurse is checking in with patients. It's all sorts of stuff. And of course, we're trying to push much more towards innovation these days. Innovation doesn't need to be digital or AI or blockchain. Innovation can be how we're looking at capacity management, for example. That is an innovation in itself in the NHS. That we're looking after. Before that, before Novartis, I worked for Pfizer for a few years. I wouldn't consider myself a pharma guy, quotation marks. I worked in fashion retail and e-commerce, and also for MasterCard for their B2C stuff, so priceless surprises and Champions League and all that asset activation. So a bit of a different world that we're bringing to the fore. And I've worked on AI projects in the past.
It's just a quick question. I know the more senior you get in any computer science field, as it were, the less coding you do, or so I hear. I assume you don't do much of that. You have other people to sort of like, I assume you design things and other people write it up for you, as it were. I hear that's the way it goes. Yeah.
Pretty much. I think the last time I coded was about 20 years ago. So I wouldn't even have a clue where to start as at today. Yeah, but I think the way it goes is, as you climb through any organization, you're supposed to give yourself more thinking time and less process time. And in fairness, certainly in the fields we work in, I think it's really valuable giving yourself time to think, because there's so much going on. Sometimes you just need to step back and just take a moment to work out, where do you want to go? Why do you want to go there? And what are you going to do about it?
So shall we jump onto our first? I mean, it's good to hear that, eventually we have to do less typing, as it were. I'm getting into that field now, so it's good to understand it for myself.
Well, I mean,
But-
Christian, you need to think about the people that. So I coded with Python myself, but this is also now 4 years ago, so I can't remember anymore. But you're gonna have to have people that also come up with the idea of what features they want to create.
Yeah.
Right. So what's the predictor that needs to be identified and needs to be found out and tested on, and that's gonna have to be a combination of both. So yeah, just because people don't end up coding, and I don't think everybody needs to be able to code in the future, because you still need people that actually have the idea of what they want to find out.
And now we'll move on to the sort of difficulties of trying to implement, obviously, various AI programs in organizations. But before we jump into that, because I think there'll be some complaining going on there, what are the sort of like bigger projects that you worked on, or what is currently going on in the field that you would say is quite exciting? What should people watch out for? Anyone who's currently in this space? I know there will be at least a few AI students on our part, people who study in the university, who'll be very curious to hear what's currently going on in this space before we go on complaining about organizations and the ladders and stuff, as it were.
Sam, I'll go.
You go first.
I think one key element, and we've seen that in 2020, and we'll keep seeing more of that, is predictive medicine. So where you can basically not predetermine, but you'll find out much quicker if a medicine is going to work or not. And the one big flag post here that happened last year is where Google's DeepMind solved the protein folding challenge. And I mean, that's been overseen by a lot of people, and because nobody quite gets it, but we're speaking to the converted here. So that's a major achievement, because that really, if you can predict how these proteins fold, you ultimately can start predicting how medicine is gonna, what medicine is gonna do with the body and in the body. And then you can design molecules that react with cause certain reactions in the body, without actually having to go through laboratory. So that's the key, I think, where data science, I don't like to call it AI, where data science really comes in.
I think similarly, in that sort of environment where we can take data about an individual and use it to either predictively improve their care or to give them some actions that they can then use to improve their own care, is really valuable. And I'll give you an example of this. If we go back in time, to have a diagnostic assessed, any of us would have to go and have a radiograph taken, an x-ray taken, or to go and have a blood sample taken. Well, today, certainly when it comes to bloods, there's a lot of good ways we can take our bloods ourselves. So imagine if, without interacting with the health service, you could submit your blood and somebody could predict when and how frequently you personally need to take your bloods or have them checked. Then in some way that blood is read, so the microbiology and the biochemistry in that blood is being done by a laboratory somewhere, and then from the data that gets derived from that and the pattern over time, it's possible to predict either markers for disease that signal to you, or even better than that, indications for treatment that are signaled to you long before a clinician might have told you the same, or you might have even known the same. And so that application of data science, I think, is really interesting. Let me give you a slightly different spin on it. Imagine there's probably not anyone on this call that doesn't have a smartphone or a smart device that right now probably predicts everything from an entry in a calendar through to the name of someone being added to a contacts list, or even the text that's going into an email that we can have these days. Imagine if you could take even those basics and put them into healthcare, either for the operator, the patient, the citizen, to be able to translate their own healthcare needs because something predicts them or identifies them and puts them into a message, or vice versa, for clinician to do the same. Even at that basic level, that application of technology is really interesting. So I think As sometimes we can all get despondent about our organizations and the world, but actually we've come a long way as society, and we can go even further with the application in healthcare.
So seeing all those amazing applications to it, even like in day-to-day life and everything that we have, then let's move on to discussion of the organizational implementation. What do you find that the challenges are? What are these sort of obstacles when you go out there and you try to implement something? What does it look like normally? And where does the idea come from, as it were, as well? Because I assume when you work in an organization, I'm not sure whether it's you coming up with an idea, oh, I could make this better. And do you go out there and you pitch it to someone, or does it come from a different space and then you implement it? Is it companies that you work with? And who is the most resistant, as it were? Because there's a lot to pick on there. But
well, I mean, Sam's left the NHS a while ago, so I'm sure lots of things have changed for the better in the NHS, Sam, since you left. not because you left. So I think so my personal experience, you're gonna have to have somebody that has an idea. It always starts with an idea. So that's the main thing. And that idea, when it comes to AI and data science, is what do I want to find out? And is that what do I want to find out going to help me solve a problem? So that problem-driven thinking is, I think, really important. So my personal experience is that it was very often through like one colleague that came and had a conversation and said, what if we do X, Y, Z? Can we do that? What if we combine data sets here and there? Could we not go into the predictive realm? So I mean, prediction for me, that's the main thing in data science. And what quite a few, this is an educational matter in organizations. What a lot of people don't realize is that to be able to predict the future, you have to be able to predict the past. And that's the way it works, right? Because you need to have your test samples and all that stuff. And that all data that's already happened. So when you go back and you say, I want to predict something that happens in 5 years, for example, patient needs in 5 years or in 10 years, for R&D purposes, you have to be able to predict that in the past. So you start a data set 10 years ago, and you then predict from the 10 years ago something that's happened 5 years ago, and you check whether that actually happened. And that's how I work on my AI projects. With external companies. That's the other question, Christian, you had, right? External companies. Very often, that was in my previous company. Sam?
Yeah, so I think probably a few things to add to that. And I really like this idea of yours around the sort of historical referencing of data, because it's not something that people really probably pay enough attention on, but it's not anything new either. We take public health. We have for many years been tracking people and patterns in the population. We've been tracking, maybe not on an individual level, but at a population level, disease patterns, environmental data, data from water, road traffic, all sorts of things we've been using for a long time, which have helped us identify basic things, like, for example, that we can predict that in a very polluted area in London, it's more likely that the children will suffer from asthma. You can see this pattern because of the way in which we know, if we take the evidence, what we know about the way in which asthma works and the patterns of pollution, we can work these things out. But that requires, as Conrad quite rightly says, data. We need past data to predict future. And as humans, we're quite good at this. But what's more challenging is the organizational form. And the UK is no different to any other place, but we have constant evolving structures that change. The very nature of the health system, public sector, the organizations that have the data is constantly changing. So the memory there, the organizational memory, the memory of the data, how it's used, how it's linked, the consistency can easily get lost when so much change is happening. So we definitely need better ways of curating that data over time. Because sometimes the unwillingness, or what might seem like an unwillingness in a big organization like the health system in the UK to implement technology, isn't because people think it's a bad idea. It's often because we don't have the infrastructure in which to make it work. But going back to your question right at the beginning, and Conrad touched on this as well, which is it's really important that it either starts off, the idea starts off either from a person or even more so from a problem. What is the need we're trying to solve? And I talk about this all the time, but basically identifying the type of need, the type of problem, and what the benefit will be of changing or fixing or solving this problem or even addressing it. But then we need a little bit of flexibility. In public sector, we expect when we're trying new things that they're going to work. And we have this optimism bias that creeps in to make them work because government expects it to work. For the money that goes in, it must work. So what I really like about working with industry partners, especially colleagues in life sciences, pharma organizations, in small startups, is there's a little bit more willingness that something may not work. We might try something and it may not be perfect, but we might have to keep on trying it again and again. And that's the really nice thing about working in partnership with industry, that they have a little bit more freedom every now and again to try things out. And that's where that innovation comes from, because they can have something that's new and creative where you can take a little bit of risk when public sector you might not be able to. So the challenge there is around A, finding out the problem and defining the problem. B is going through the experimenting stage to come up with a technology solution. And then C is when we've got the technology solution and perhaps it works, to keep iterating it and build the infrastructure over time for it to continue working from.
It's interesting.
I tend to agree on that, Sam. Sorry, Christian.
Yeah, no, please.
I want to pick up on the organizational memory piece, and I never thought about this, Sam, in that respect. And everybody will hear I have a cold. So there we go. Nice start to the week. So sorry for sneezing and coughing. It's not COVID. So I think I've experienced this. Okay, so you build out your data map and you start talking to all these people where the data sits in my previous company. That was, and you go, okay, you guys have contact to IQVIA, so I get my thing from here. This is the climate data. I'm not going to give away the project because it's IP'd by Pfizer, and all the other things. And then what happens is you have a huge shakeup in the people that actually manage all that data. And then you need to, and then your third party that you're also operating with and that you need to then connect to everything, they lose connection, like quite literally. They get kicked out because and this is the other thing, annually with large organizations, these smaller startups or scale-ups, they need to renew their license to be able to access even third-party data that goes through the large organization. So it's a licensing question as well. Do you, as an organization, have the right to pass through? I'm just going to use IQVIA because it's so common. IQVIA data to a third party, or do you need to pay extra? Do you need to renegotiate your contract? It's all those boring things that need to be fixed before you can even start creating the cool features you're after, or try to find out whether they exist. And I've like once or twice delayed projects by months because that hadn't been figured out. So you learn. And then I left the organization, and then now nobody knew anymore how that works. So you just, that's a big deal. Sam, thanks, Sam, for highlighting that. That is a big problem, organizational memory.
And it's sometimes it's so obvious, but actually none of us, until we go through it, have the opportunity to reflect on it. And I certainly know from colleagues in the NHS, like after I left the center of the NHS, even now, almost 2 years later, I still get calls and from colleagues saying, "Oh, how do I do this? And where do I find this?" And okay, it's good because we're all friends and we can communicate. But equally, I can see in other organizations it must be difficult. So that continuity is really important.
I was going to quickly comment. You mentioned working with small startups. Obviously, data, with my very limited knowledge of the field, I understand that data is very important, and I assume small startups don't tend to have A, the data, or B, a lot of the time, the funds. So I'm quite interested in how that works when you do work with small startups. Do you find that they tend to be already invested in? How do they get their data? Because again, or is it, how does that come?
So it's really different. And this is, and thank you, Christian, for that cue. So this is one of the things we do in the biome in Novartis quite frequently. So we pick up with startups. Not we work with scale-ups, but one of our missions, so to speak, is to help specifically in the UK the startup infrastructure, startup ecosystem to grow. Because what our corporate responsibility as a UK employer is, Novartis is a large company, but we're here in the UK, is to further that ecosystem and have a place in there and help it grow. Because I personally think that the UK is one of the leading countries in that space. Being a German living here, I can tell you Germany is a huge laggard when it comes to digital. Things you can do here in the health system digitally, patient records and all that stuff in Germany, you still walk out of a GP practice with a note and with your prescription. So big advances have been made. And when working with startups, the data question, very often startups work with Novartis, for example, to have access to the data. So to then compliantly, of course, work with the data lake that we have and to start creating features and to start looking at certain things. For example, how can we better support patients with digital patient companions when it comes to an unfortunate cases of cancer, right? So what is there, and especially last year and still this year, is highlighted how important that is. When you can't talk to your Macmillan nurse anymore because you can't physically sit opposite that person. So what can you do in a digital space? But I digress. So startups, I always say, no problem, no startup. So if a startup doesn't have to solve a problem, there is no startup. And it's, at least on my desk, very often it's been the case now that there is a really good idea, but it hasn't been brought to life. And that's bringing to life. That's one of the things we do in the biome, and also with this year's Health Hub and last year and the year before, really giving startups that problem to solve. So that's what we're doing. Sorry, Sam, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, look, I completely agree about that point around the problem, because sometimes I'll get people coming to me and asking me, oh, we want to create a startup. I'd be like, to do what? Like a startup, what are you starting up? And then someone say, I'm a founder of a startup. I was like, what's your startup? And then they're like, well, I'm still looking into it. And so quite often people will start up with the concept of a startup without actually having a problem to solve. It's just the idea of being in a startup can be appealing. So the most important thing is start off with having a problem of some kind that you're solving and something you really believe in. Like, you either have to be personally vested in it, or you really have to have, some values that are driven towards whatever the thing is that you're trying to fix or solve, because after a while it gets boring. So you have to be able to do that. Now, the data is, of course, challenging. Now, for some, and quite often we're lucky in the UK, and we're really lucky in the sense that in the UK, when people have a problem, they'll often be quite creative trying to find a solution, which inevitably means they might create a startup. So whether that's a clinician working in the NHS, whether it's a technologist partnering with someone in the NHS, a researcher, it could be someone from pharma or life sciences, or it could even be someone from industry, could often find a way to collaborate with people. So I tend to find, put two people together or a few people together where they share a problem or share the need to solve the problem, they will creatively find a way to start solving that problem. And they'll get an organization on board that wants to help them solve it. So inevitably, they'll soon start getting some data, and in a safe way, working together, and they'll find that data. What's more difficult is getting historical data at scale. But again, in the UK, we're quite lucky that there are repositories of some data, not always identifiable data, but at least data from which we can draw some insights, whether that's national level data, data held by charity or by academic organizations. Sometimes it exists. not an identifiable sort of level, but it can exist at a population level at times. But there are ways of getting some insights they can use. What can be more difficult, though, is scaling that startup in order to get that either that bigger footprint, that bigger reach. And where we're really lucky is because of the way that the UK happens to fund innovation. And whilst it's never perfect anywhere in the world, we're really lucky that there's innovation funding in the UK. Now, what we might call innovation might vary, but we're lucky that there is some of a UK pipeline to fund innovation. There are lots of structures within government and outside of government to support it. So whether it's Novartis Biome as a sort of accelerator, whether it happens to be the NHS's own accelerator programs, whether it's funding programs or support, both in government or from third parties or academic organizations, or even research funding. We're quite lucky that the UK does still have good funding towards programs. And what that means is when you can drive interest, as you're solving a problem, it's going to contribute towards benefits in society. That means some government related funding might come. Inevitably, third party funding from venture or elsewhere naturally follows. And we've been very lucky in the UK that UK orientated startups that are solving a novel problem or a problem in a different way will often attract some interest from government organizations and industry, and then naturally will attract VC funding in a positive way. We've seen a really good, strong pipeline in the recent few years.
I mean, this will be a good note, I think, to put my own plug in. So I'm actually part of the Essex Startups team. So what we do, part of our offering is helping students start businesses. So for anyone watching, that's there for you as well. But yeah, I'm just touching on what Conrad said earlier about the German healthcare system. I want to relate that back to the UK healthcare system because I think it's still, and it might be just because I've got a concept of the UK health system, but I think it's still quite old in the grand scheme of things. I know a few people who work in the NHS on a relatively low level, and I think even with basic tech, they're still quite far behind. I mean, they keep electronic records, but it's still very ancient computer technology, as it were. Maybe not floppy disks, but very much, do you know what I mean? Like keeping everything on one old dusty computer. Do you think, I mean, I wonder what your thoughts on this are. Like, do you think it's good in comparison to other countries? Do you think it's, how do you see that?
You work in NHS, I'll give that to you.
Wow, give me the best question. Thank you, Conrad. Well, these are my views, right? Like most systems in Western Europe originate from the Bismarck model, right? Like most of them kind of come from that model. So there are very few variations in reality across Western Europe. Okay, yes, we've all got slightly different models, but they all kind of come from the same place. That sort of Bismarck model was kind of, if you like, the origins of, healthcare models across Europe, whether that's Germany, Belgium, France, UK. We're all much in a muchness of some shades of the same thing. Okay, the UK has one of the biggest publicly funded health systems, but all nations have a variety of them and they offer different things. And when it comes to technology in those environments, we probably need to split the technology into three parts. There is technology that is for planning, commissioning, epidemiology, right? That's sort of a system level. And in the UK, we're not bad at doing that. We have some national structures which curate mainly activity data. Then you've got data that exists directly for use around prevention and patient use. We're not so good at that. We're not so good at freeing the data for patient access. And I'd certainly say there's a lot more we can do. In the last few years, it's got a tiny bit better, but I am one of the critics out there that says it needs to go much further, because if we don't get this right for patients and citizens, the ability of people to take care of their own futures is more difficult because we're not freeing them up and giving them the tools that allow people to make their own decisions. There's a middle bit, the healthcare system. Now remember, in the UK, the NHS has more than, and I say it all the time, more than 33,000 organisations that make up the NHS just in England, not even Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. When you have that degree of complexity, to have a single continuous record would be very difficult unless we put some infrastructure in place. So where the NHS has done well is putting some national infrastructure in place. Things like the NHS spine isn't bad. It's still a good starting point. Where it can do better is connecting up the data so that different organizations using different applications can use that data the same way a patient would. And if I look at what Europe is doing, parts of Europe have legislated for this. But even though they've legislated for this, on the ground, it's still challenging. Take Germany. I was talking to some colleagues in Germany the other day, and they were explaining that they've got legislation for electronic prescribing, like we have in the UK. Except in the UK, because it's within the state model, it exists everywhere. Whereas in Germany, whilst it exists, and of course the government support is there, on the ground, the implementation hasn't happened everywhere yet. So I think there are pros and cons of every system. But generally speaking, if I take a step back and compare ourselves to other parts of the world, across Europe, we're all doing reasonably well at it. The one thing the German system is doing, I think, exceptionally well, that we should look to as an example, is the funding of digital therapeutics. Whilst there might be in-country criticism of how fast the scheme is not going, actually compared to other parts of Europe, to fund 11 types of digital therapeutics is very progressive. And Belgium, I think, is going to follow not soon after. I think they're probably going to have a model. And the UK has got a lot to learn from this model because, I think that's something they're doing very well, which is a different area of digital, healthcare and technology. But it's something that they're doing very well in a place like Germany. But Conrad might have some thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, and it's really, thank you, Sam, for those comments. And I want to pick up on the DTX, the digital therapeutic space in Germany. We're talking about Germany now, funnily enough. But it's a good comparator to the UK. So I learned when I talked to people in the Department of International Trade here in the UK, and other people in government, that it's not so much legislation that is needed, it's just a uniform policy. And there is work underway with NICE to look at digital therapeutics here in the UK, and as many other companies and private and public bodies, it's a huge consultation going on at the moment. So I think we're going to get somewhere. The German model has been hailed as this trailblazer, and you rightfully said, Sam, it's not going fast enough, because it is not. The startup space in Germany is a funny one, because you have pockets where money is flowing in huge amounts, but then you've got really startups that are one or two people that still don't have a foothold within the health system, because in Germany it's also fragmented. So you do not have that one body you're talking to. The NHS in the UK, you've got, I think in Germany, close to 200 insurers like the NHS. I mean, if you look at our payer, and wherever you are and whatever employment type you have, so location and employment type, you're talking to another insurer. And that fragmentation means fragmentation in tech. So that's the big problem. If you look at the UK, you talk to the NHS. That is your one body. I know there's a lot of organizations in the NHS, Sam, but you talk to that one body and you can try to lift the tide for everyone using tech. And that's why the UK has been seen as a test bed for a lot of those solutions globally, because of that one approach. So if it works in the UK, it works anywhere else. And that's also the approach a lot of countries, Ireland takes NICE basically for granted when it comes for reviews. The US look at NICE as well. They have their own reviews, of course, but they look at NICE. A lot of South American countries look towards NICE reviews as well. So there's a lot of example that has been taken from the UK, and that's why this is such a great place to be for tech startups, because you do get the in. And I think in the last 2 years, so I joined Novartis in October, but in the last 2 years of the Biome Health Hubs, I think out of the 6 selected companies, 3 in total ended up having a proof of concept or even a scale up with the NHS. So that alone showed that there was a need that had to be served. And Novartis's role is really just facilitating that. We don't have any financial gain from that. So we're not benefiting financially of that at all, right? So that's, I think, is important to see as a response to our societal responsibility, really, in the UK.
I congratulate you both. Very political answers in terms of the question. Could have easily mixed in the healthcare systems with mud there, but very good, very informative as well. So now, I think this should be the last talking point, sort of talking about healthcare and its sustainability and the role of the industry in a future, as it were. Do you have any opinions as to where it's heading, what that will look like?
I've got a fairly strong view on this, and you know, I think going forwards we are going to need a greater partnership between industry, society, and the state. It can no longer be any one of those on their own, but really all three working together. And I think it's probably the right point to reflect on the last year that we've really seen the benefits of all three of those working together, of industry and pharma organizations working closely with government and academics, and at the same time, everyone communicating with society around some of the benefits that can come from this. Everything from being involved in research and trials through to the use of data, and even as we've seen with some other areas, not necessarily with drugs, but with the adoption of technology. I think what's important is you need a supportive government and a supportive environment, and really need to take time to communicate the right messages with society and work in a collaborative way with the sector. And we've seen that from the development of vaccines used for COVID through to the adoption of some technology for remote monitoring, and other things which may not be necessarily the most used, but even technology such as online consulting in healthcare. And I think this is a starting point. So I would say we need strong partnerships between all the players in the system, and it can no longer be a paternalistic sort of space of just the state trying to push down, but one where it's more collaborative, more than it's been in the past. And with that, we might have some chance of tackling some of the problems. But pouring more money into the system is unlikely to be the only sort of solution, because healthcare systems inevitably, especially publicly funded ones, always try to be as efficient as they can, but that doesn't mean they're as economic as they can be, which means where if we use industry and organizations working in partnership with, then we might be able to get the benefits to all.
Yeah, I agree with that. And there's a sort of a notion you can utilize, sort of the democratizing healthcare, and I mean it's been used now widely in other respects as well. They were democratizing something, but to me it really, to build up on what Sam said, to me it really is that much closer collaboration between private and public entities. You will not be able to serve all patients with the degree of quality that we're looking at, and with a continued quality in the next 10, 15 years, if you keep that system as it is. It's just not going to be possible. So, and I'm not talking about, oh, we need to, we need to sell off the NHS and we need to tear it apart. And no, the NHS is...
That was the main concern there, I think.
No, the NHS is a body that is established, that is has 100% its place in this society. And there's no question about it. I'm asking, how can we help the NHS? That's the question, right? How can we help the NHS to continue the quality of care? And that's the question. And one of the things that is in there is the democratization of healthcare, which has really these three pillars. It's closer cross collaboration between private and public, but it's also a data question, because it's a data conversation, right? It is, every patient should have the right to switch on and off the health data other bodies hold about them. No if, no but. And we're not there. Okay, if I ask my hospital to delete my data, they might do that, but I don't know whether this data had gone somewhere else. How do I know that? Okay, so blockchain can help you as technology, but there's pod systems, there's other ways this can work as well. And the last piece is an access question, and access not in a technical sense, but access to medicine. So that's the last pillar of democratizing healthcare. More patients, more access to affordable medicine. That's also the question that is in there. And once we got these three things sorted, we're looking towards a bright future where we're not selling off the NHS, where we're not tearing it apart, but where we're helping the NHS to maintain the quality of care. And that's, for me, is really important. I'm 41 now. In 10 years, I'm going to be towards 60. I want the NHS to be there, right? So I'm old. So there you go. That's really what we want.
So I think it's a beautiful note to end on there. A lot to think about. I have a separate few emails talking about the content. A lot of people find it really interesting. But yeah, I think we'll draw everything to a close there. Just as a quick note, we do have another session running after this by namely how to build data-driven culture for AI. That's more on a business angle. That's by Pratim Das from Microsoft. So for anyone watching, please jump onto the next session from there. For our speakers right now, Sam, Conrad, thank you so much. Really amazing insight into the field. And yeah, hopefully there'll be more events just like this in the future. Thank you so much for today. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you for having us. Bye.